Hello, everyone, and welcome back yet again to another episode of Year of Stories. I'm your host, Suke Yarrow. Last time there was some audio skipping. I don't know what's going on there. It might be the website I used to record, so I'll look into that. I haven't looked into it yet. I hope this doesn't have audio skipping. I really hope it doesn't. If it does, then I might just cry myself to sleep. That one. I'm just kidding. But I forget at what point we left off last time, so I'm just gonna do a quick back read. Oh, Mr. Jenkins found out about his mouse son, the status. Oh my god, my voice is dying so quick, and we just started. Hydration is important, everyone. This might finally be the episode where we finish the book. I have no idea, because every time I say that, it's like, no, you haven't finished the book. So, I don't want to jinx it. We might finish it, we might not, as is typical with life. So, The Triumph, page 184. Mr. Jenkins had not gone more than a few paces towards the Grand High Witch's table when a piercing scream rose high above all the other noises in the room, and at the same moment I saw the Grand High Witch go shooting up into the air. Now she was standing on her chair, still screaming. Now she was on the tabletop, waving her arms. "What on earth's happening, Grandmama?" "Wait," my grandmother said. "Keep quiet and watch." Suddenly, all the other witches, more than 80 of them, were beginning to scream and jump up out of their seats as though spikes were being stuck into their bottoms. Some were standing on chairs, some were up on the tables, and all of them were wriggling about and waving their arms in the most extraordinary manner. Then, all at once, they became quiet. Then they stiffened. Every single witch stood there as stiff and silent as a corpse. The whole room became deathly still. "They're shrinking, Grandmama," I said. "They're shrinking, just like I did." "I know they are," my grandmother said. "It's the mouse maker," I cried. "Look, some of them are growing fur on their faces. Why is it working so quickly, Grandmama?" "I'll tell you why," my grandmother said. "Because all of them have had massive overdoses, just like you. It's thrown the alarm clock right out of whack." Is it massive? It's 5 doses per person, so maybe that's massive. I don't know. It's 500 doses in a bottle, and 98 witches. So then divide the 500 by the one, by rounding up the 98, because some people might have a slight amount more. But then it's distributed out. So I don't know. I don't know how things work. It's a weird magic thing. I don't know why I'm trying to logic my way out of it. Where the heck am I? Everyone in the dining room was standing up now to get a better view. People were moving closer. They were beginning to crowd round the 2 long tables. My grandmother lifted Bruno and me up so that we wouldn't miss any of the fun. In her excitement, she jumped up on her chair so that she could see over the heads of the crowd. In another few seconds, all the witches had completely disappeared, and the tops of the 2 long tables were swarming with small brown mice. All over the dining room, women were screaming, and strong men were turning white in the face and shouting, "It's crazy! This can't happen! Let's get the heck out of here, quick!" Waiters were attacking the mice with chairs and wine bottles and anything else that came to hand. I saw a chef in a tall white hat rushing out from the kitchen, brandishing a frying pan. Another one just behind him was wielding a carving knife above his head, and everyone was yelling, "Mice! Mice! Mice! We must get rid of the mice!" Only the children in the room were really enjoying it. They all seemed to know instinctively that something good was going on right there in front of them, and they were clapping and cheering and laughing like mad. "It's time to go," my grandmother said. "Our work is done." She got down off her chair and picked up her handbag and slung it over her arm. She had me in her right hand and Bruno in her left. "Bruno," she said, "the time has come to restore you to the famous bosom of your family." My mom's not very crazy about mice, Bruno said. So I noticed, my grandmother said. She'll just have to get used to you, won't she? It was not difficult to find Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins. You could hear Mrs. Jenkins' shrill voice all over the room. Herbert, it was screaming. Herbert, get me out of here. There's mice everywhere. They'll go up my skirts. She had her arms high up around her husband, and from where I was, she seemed to be swinging from his neck. My grandmother... Bleh. My... My grandmother advanced upon them and thrust Bruno into Mr. Jenkins' hand. Here's your little boy, she said. He needs to go on a diet. Hi, Dad, Bruno said. Hi, Mum. Mrs. Jenkins screamed even louder. My grandmother, with me in her hand, turned and marched out of the lobby and out through the front entrance into the open air. My goodness, suddenly I can't read. Speaking of reading, this isn't a very smooth transition. I didn't read the book Matilda, but I saw the musical for Matilda last night with my mom and sister. It was very fun. If I finish the book early, like, depending on how much time, then I might tell y'all how my evening went. I keep doing Debbie Ryan hands, like, you know the thing, like, the hair thing. If you know what I'm talking about, then, yeah, vibe with it. If you don't, then sucks to be a boomer, I suppose. I'm sorry, that was so rude. I'm so sorry. Oh, no. I say it's rude because I know some people, like, find it genuinely offensive. Some people see it as a joke. I don't know anymore. I don't know my own opinion. Anyway, where the heck am I? Into the open air. Outside it was a lovely warm evening and I could hear the waves breaking on the beach just across the road from the hotel. Is there a taxi here? My grandmother said to the tall doorman in his green uniform. Certainly, madam, he said, and he put two fingers into his mouth. Into his mouse. Yeah, that's... Ooh. Into his mouth and blew a long, shrill whistle. I watched him with envy. For weeks I had been trying to whistle like that, but I hadn't succeeded once. Now I never would. The taxi came. The driver was an oldish man with a thick, black, drooping mustache. The mustache hung over his mouth like the roots of some plant. Where to, madam? He asked. Suddenly he caught sight of me, a little mouse, nestling in my grandmother's hand. Blimey, he said. What's that? It's my grandson, my grandmother said. Drive us to the station, please. I always liked mice, the old taxi driver said. I used to keep hundreds of them when I was a boy. Mice is the fastest breeders in the world. Did you know that, ma'am? So if he's your grandson, then I reckon you'll be having a few great-grandsons to go with him in a couple of weeks' time. I can't do accents. That sounded country. It was supposed to be British. Ugh. Drive us to the station, please, my grandmother said, looking prim. Yes, ma'am, right away, he said, right away. My grandmother got into the back of the taxi and sat down and put me on her lap. Are we going home? I asked her. Yes, she answered. Back to Norway. Hooray, I cried. Oh, hooray, hooray, hooray. I thought you'd like that, she said. But what about our luggage? Who cares about luggage, she said. The taxi was driving through the streets of Bournemouth, and this was the time of day when the pavements were crowded with the holiday makers, all wandering about aimlessly with nothing to do. How are you feeling, my darling? My grandmother said. Fine, I said. Quite marvelous. She began stroking the fur on the back of my neck with one finger. We have accomplished great feats today, she said. It's been terrific, I said. Absolutely terrific. The Heart of a Mouse, page 191. Bros. We might be, about to finish, because there's 206 pages, and we're if I know my math, then this is, 16 pages left. Roughly. 16, 15. It was lovely to be back in Norway once again in my grandmother's fine old house. But now that I was so small, everything looked different, and it took me quite a while to find my way around. Mine was a world of carpets and table legs and chair legs and the little crannies behind large pieces of furniture. A closed door could not be opened, and nothing could be reached that was on a table. But after a few days, my grandmother began to invent gadgets for me in order to make life a bit easier. She got a carpenter to put together in a number of slim, tall stepladders. She placed one of these against each table in the house so that I could climb up whenever I wanted to. She herself invented a wonderful door pulling device made out of wires and springs and pulleys, with heavy weights dangling on cords, and soon every door in the house had a door opener on it. All I had to do was press my front paws onto a tiny wooden platform, and hey, presto, a spring would stretch up and a weight would drop and the door would swing open. Next, she rigged up an equally ingenious system whereby I could switch on the light whenever I entered a room at night. I could not explain how it worked because I know nothing about electricity, but there was a little button let into the floor near the door in every room in the house, and when I pressed the button gently with one paw, the light would come on, and when I pressed it a second time, the light would go off again. My grandmother made me a tiny toothbrush, using a matchstick for the handle, and into this she stuck little bits of Bristol that she had snapped off one of her hairbrushes. You must not get any holes in your teeth, she said. I can't take a mouse to a dentist. He'd think I was crazy. It's funny, I said, but ever since I became a mouse, I've hated the taste of sweets and chocolate, so I don't think I'll get any holes. You are still going to brush your teeth after every meal, my grandmother said, and I did. For a bathtub, she gave me a silver sugar basin, and I bathed in it every night before going to bed. She allowed no one else into the house, not even a servant or a cook. We kept entirely to ourselves, and we were very happy in each other's company. One evening, as I lay on my grandmother's lap in front of the fire, she said to me, I wonder what happened to that little Bruno. I wouldn't be surprised if his father gave him to the hall porter to drown in the fire bucket, I answered. I'm afraid you may be right, my grandmother said. The poor little thing. I'm sorry, but that's a mouse child. So, that, in a way, is still a human child. Like a human mouse child, because he's still got the, human brain, but he just looks like a little mousy mouse. And y'all are just casually talking about how he's probably dead, and I feel like I should be a little uncomfortable with that moment right there. Like, I don't. Perdóname, por favor. I. We were silent for a few minutes, my grandmother puffing away at her black cigar while I dozed comfortably in the warmth. Can I ask you something, Grandmama? I said. Ask me anything you like, my darling. How long does a mouse live? Ah, she said. I've been waiting for you to ask me that. There was a silence. She sat there smoking away and gazing at the fire. Well, I said, how long do we live, us mice? I have been reading about mice, she said. I have been trying to find out everything I can about them. Go on then, Grandmama. Why don't you tell me? If you really want to know, she said, I'm afraid a mouse doesn't live for a very long time. How long? I asked. Well, an ordinary mouse only lives for about 3 years, she said, but you are not an ordinary mouse. You are a mouse person, and that is a very different matter. How different? I asked. How long does a mouse person live, Grandmama? Longer, she said. Much longer. How much longer? I asked. A mouse person will almost certainly live for 3 times as long as an ordinary mouse, my grandmother said. About 9 years. Good, I cried. That's great. It's the best news I've ever had. Why do you say that? She asked, surprised. Because I would never want to live longer than you, I said. I couldn't stand being looked after by anybody else. There was a short silence. She had a way of fondling me behind the ears with the tip of one finger. It felt lovely. How old are you, Grandmama? I asked. I'm 86, she said. Will you live another 8 or 9 years? I might, she said, with a bit of luck. You've got to, I said, because by then I'll be a very old mouse and you'll be a very old grandmother, and soon after that we'll both die together. That would be perfect, she said. I had a little doze after that. I just shut my eyes and thought of nothing and felt at peace with the world. Would you like me to tell you something about yourself that is very interesting? My grandmother said. Yes, please, Grandmama, I said without opening my eyes. I couldn't believe it at first, but apparently it's quite true. What is it? I asked. She said. What is it? I asked. "The heart of a mouse," she said, "and that means your heart is beating at the rate of 500 times a minute. Isn't that amazing?" "That's not possible," I said, opening my eyes wide. "It's as true as I'm sitting here," she said. "It's a sort of a miracle." "That's nearly 9 beats every second," I cried, working it out in my head. "Correct," she said. "Your heart is going so fast it's impossible to hear the separate beats. All one hears is a soft humming sound." She was wearing a lace dress, and the lace kept tickling my nose. I had to rest my head on my front paws. "Have you ever heard my heart humming away, Grandmama?" I asked her. "Often," she said. "I hear it when you are lying very close to me on the pillow at night." The two of us remained silent in front of the fire for a long time after that, thinking about these wonderful things. "My darling," she said, "are you sure you don't mind being a mouse for the rest of your life?" "I don't mind at all," I said. "It doesn't matter who you are or what you look like, so long as somebody loves you." It's off to work we go. Hi ho, hi ho, it's off to work we go. Bum 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 ba dum bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 ba dum bum bum. Bum 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 ba dum bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Yes, I did just hum hi ho from Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, the Disney version. So what? For supper that evening, my grandmother had a plain omelet and one slice of bread. I had a piece of that brown Norwegian goat's milk cheese known as geitost. I'm guessing on that, which I had loved even when I was a boy. We ate in front of the fire, my grandmother in her armchair and me on the table with my cheese on a small plate. "Grandmama," I said, "now that we have done away with the Grand High Witch, will all the other witches in the world gradually disappear?" "I'm quite sure they won't," she answered. I stopped chewing and stared at her. "But they must!" I cried. "Surely they must!" "I'm afraid not," she said. "But if she's not there any longer, how are they going to get all the money they need? And who's going to give them orders and jazz them up at their annual meetings and invent all their magic formulas for them?" When a queen bee dies, there is always another queen bee in the hive ready to take her place," my grandmother said. "It's the same with witches. In the Great Witch headquarters, where the Grand High Witch lives, there is always another Grand High Witch waiting in the wings to take over should anything happen." "Oh no," I cried. "That means everything we did was for nothing. Have we become a mouse for nothing at all?" "We saved the children of England," she said. "I don't call that nothing." I know," I cried. "But that's not nearly good enough. I felt sure that all the witches of the world would slowly fade away after we had got rid of their leader. Now you tell me that everything is going to go on just the same as before?" "Not exactly as before," my grandmother said. "For instance, there are no longer any witches in England. That's quite a triumph, isn't it?" "But what about the rest of the world?" I cried. "What about America and France and Holland and Germany? And what about Norway?" "You must not think I have been sitting back and doing nothing these last few days," she said. "I have been giving a great deal of thought and time to that particular problem." I was looking up at her face when she said this, and all at once I noticed that a little secret smile was beginning to spread slowly around her eyes and the corners of her mouth. "Why are you smiling, Grandmama?" I asked her. "I have some rather interesting news for you," she said. "What news?" "Shall I tell it to you right from the beginning?" "Yes, please," I said. "I like good news." She had finished her omelet, and I had had enough of my cheese. She wiped her lips with a napkin and said, "As soon as we arrived back in Norway, I picked up the telephone and made a call to England." "Who in England, Grandmama?" "To the chief of police in Bournemouth, my darling. I told him I was the chief of police for the whole of Norway, and that I was interested in the peculiar happenings that had taken place recently in the Hotel Magnificent." "Now hang on a sec, Grandmama," I said. "There's no way an English policeman is going to believe that you are the head of the Norwegian police." "I am very good at imitating a man's voice," she said. Of course he believed me. The policeman in Bournemouth was honored to get a call from the chief of police for the whole of Norway. So what did you ask him? I asked him for the name and address of the lady who lived in room 454 in the Hotel Magnificent, the one who disappeared. You mean the Grand High Witch? I cried. Yes, my darling, and he gave it to you. Naturally, he gave it to me. One policeman will always help another policeman. By go- Wait. By golly, you've got a nerve, Grandmama. I wanted her address, my grandmother said. But did he know her address? He did indeed. They had found her passport in her room, and her address was in it. It was also in the hotel register. Everyone who stays in a hotel has to put a name and address in the book, but surely the Grand High Witch wouldn't have put her real name and address in the hotel register. Why ever not? My grandmother said. Nobody in the world had the faintest idea who she was except the other witches. Wherever you went, people simply knew her as a nice lady. You, my darling, and you alone were the only non-witch ever to see her with her mask off. Even in her home district, in the village where she lived, people knew her as a kindly and very wealthy baroness who gave large sums of money to charity. I have checked up on that. I was getting excited now. And that address you got, Grandmama, that must have been the secret headquarters of the Grand High Witch. It still is, my grandmother said, and that will be where the new Grand High Witch is certain to be living at this very moment with her retinue of special assistant witches. Important rulers are always surrounded by a large retinue of assistants. Where is her headquarters, Grandmama? I cried. Tell me quick where it is. It is a castle, my grandmother said, and the fascinating thing is that in that castle will be all the names and addresses of all the witches in the world. How else could a Grand High Witch run her business? How else could she summon the witches of the various countries to their annual meetings? Where's the castle, Grandmama? I cried impatiently. Which country? Tell me quick. Guess, she said. Norway, I cried. Right first time, she answered, high up in the mountains above a small village. This was thrilling news. I did a little dance of excitement on the tabletop. My grandmother was My grandmother was getting pretty worked up herself, and now she heaved herself out of her chair and began pacing up and down the room, thumping the carpet with her stick. So we have work to do, you and I, she cried. We have a great task ahead of us. Thank heavens you are a mouse. A mouse can go anywhere. And I'll have and all I'll there we go. All I'll have I just fixed it and then I messed it up again. All I'll have to do is put you down somewhere near the Grand High Witch's castle, and you will very easily be able to get inside it and creep around looking and listening to your heart's content. I will, I answered. No one will ever see me. Moving about in a big castle will be child's play compared with going into a crowded kitchen full of cooks and waiters. You could spend days in there if necessary, my grandmother cried. In her excitement, she was waving her stick all over the place, and suddenly she knocked over a tall and very beautiful vase that went crashing onto the floor and smashed into a million pieces. She said, I forgot what she said. Forget it, she said. It's only Ming. You could spend weeks in that. Wait. Oh, okay. I thought I was reading the same thing again, so I was like, hold on. What? Um, it's only Ming. You could spend weeks in that castle if you wanted to, and they'd never know you were there. I myself would get a room in the village, and you could sneak out of the castle and have supper with me every night and tell me what was going on. I could, I cried out, and inside the castle I could go snooping around simply everywhere. But your main job, of course, my grandmother said, would be to destroy every witch in the place. That really would be the end of the whole organization. Me? Destroy them? I cried. How could I do that? Can't you guess? She said. Tell me, I said. Mouse Maker, my grandmother shouted. Formula 86 delayed action Mouse Maker all over again. You will feed it to everyone in the castle by putting drops of it into their food. You do remember the recipe, don't you? Every bit of it, I answered. You mean we're going to make it ourselves? Why not? She cried. If they can make it, so can we. It's just a question of knowing what goes into it. Who's going to climb up the tall trees to get the Gruntel's eggs? I asked her. I will, she cried. I'll do it myself. There's plenty of life in this old dog yet. I think I'd better do that part of it, Grandmama. You might come a cropper. "Those are just details," she cried, waving her stick again. "We shall let nothing stand in our way." "And what happens after that?" I asked her. "After the new Grand High Witch and everyone else in the castle have been turned into mice. Then the castle will be completely empty, and I shall come in and join you, and—" "Wait," I cried. "Hold on, Grandmama. I've just had a nasty thought." "What nasty thought?" she said. "When the mouse maker turned me into a mouse," I said, "I didn't become just an ordinary mouse that you catch with mouse traps. I became a talking, thinking, intelligent mouse person who wouldn't go near a mouse trap." My grandmother stopped dead in her tracks. She already knew what was coming next. "Therefore," I went on, "if we use the mouse maker to turn the new Grand High Witch and all the other witches in the castle into mice, the whole place will be swarming with very clever, very nasty, very dangerous talking, thinking mouse witches. They'll all be witches in mouse's clothing, and that," I added, "could be very horrible indeed." "My golly, you're right!" she cried. "That never occurred to me. I couldn't possibly take on a castle full of mouse witches," I said. "Nor could I," she said. "They'd have to be got rid of at once. They'd have to be smashed and bashed and chopped up into little pieces exactly as they were in the Hotel Magnificent." "I'm not doing that," I said. "I couldn't anyway. I don't think you could either, Grandmama. And mousetraps wouldn't be the slightest use, by the way." And who who did me in was wrong about mousetraps, wasn't she? "Yes, yes," my grandmother said impatiently, "but I'm not concerned with that Grand High Witch. She's been chopped up long ago by the hotel chef. It's the new Grand High Witch we've got to deal with now. The one up in the castle and all her assistants. A Grand High Witch is bad enough when she's disguised as a lady, but just think of what she could do if she were a mouse. She could go anywhere." "I've got it!" I shouted, leaping about a foot in the air. "I've got the answer!" "Tell me!" my grandmother snapped. "The answer is cats!" I shouted. "Bring on the cats!" My grandmother stared at me. Then a great grin spread over her face and she shouted, "It's brilliant! Absolutely brilliant! Shove half a dozen cats into that castle," I cried, "and they'll kill every mouse in the place in 5 minutes. I don't care how clever they are." "You're a magician!" my grandmother shouted, starting to wave her stick about once again. "Look out for the vases, Grandmama! To heck with the vases!" she shouted. "I'm so thrilled I don't care if I break the lot." "Just one thing," I said. "You've got to make absolutely sure I'm well out of the way before you put the cats in." "That's a promise," she said. "What will we do after the cats have killed all the mice?" I asked her. "I'll take all the cats back to the village, and then you and I will have the castle completely to ourselves." "And then," I said, "then we shall go through the records and get the names and addresses of all the witches in the whole wide world." "And after that," I said, quivering with excitement, "after that, my darling, the greatest task of all will begin for you and me. We shall pack our bags and go traveling all over the world. In every country we visit, we shall seek out the houses where the witches are living. We shall find each house one by one, and having found it, you will creep inside and leave your little drop of deadly mouse maker in the bread, or the cornflakes, or the rice pudding, or whatever food you see lying about. It will be a triumph, my darling, a colossal, unbeatable triumph. You shall do it entirely. We shall do it entirely by ourselves, just you and me. That will be our work for the rest of our lives." My grandmother picked me up off the table and kissed me on the nose. "Oh, my goodness me, we're going to be busy these next few weeks and months and years," she cried. "I think we are," I said. "But what fun and excitement it's going to be." "You can say that again," my grandmother cried, giving me another kiss. "I can't wait to get started." Ahem. Roald Dahl, 1916 to 1990, was born in Wales of Norwegian parents. He spent his childhood in England and, at age 18, went to work for the Shell Oil Company in Africa. When World War II broke out, he joined the Royal Air Force and became a fighter pilot. At the age of 26, he moved to Washington, D.C., and it was there he began to write. His first short story, which recounted his adventures in the war, was bought by the Saturday Evening Post, and so began a long and illustrious career. After establishing himself as a writer for adults, Roald Dahl began writing children's stories in 1960 while living in England with his family. His first stories were written as entertainment for his own children, to whom many of his books are dedicated. Roald Dahl is now considered one of the most beloved storytellers of our time. Although he passed away in 1990, his popularity continues to increase as his fantastic novels, including James and the Giant Peach, Matilda, The BFG, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, delight an ever-growing legion of fans. Learn more about Roald Dahl at the official Roald Dahl website, www.roalddahl.com. Quentin Blake is a well-known artist whose work has made him popular on both sides of the Atlantic. He has illustrated most of Roald Dahl's children's books as well as many others. He lives in London, where he teaches illustration at the Royal College of Art. Sorry for that loud cough. Well, we've done it. We finished the book. That took so many times of just, oh, this will be the end. It wasn't the end. It was like the end was never gonna appear, I swear. Well, it's been 30 minutes. I normally do hour-long episodes, but considering the book is over, we can cut it short. So, oh right, I want to talk about last night for me. So, I went to see the musical Matilda, but before that we went to this little Thai place. I'm not saying the names because I don't want to dox myself. My sister was so problematic with picking out her food. She went with the Mu Yang or Mu Yang, but then she found a hair in her food, so we had to send it back, and they were gonna make her a new one, but then she felt bad, so she just didn't have a full dinner at the restaurant. She had cheesecake brulee, and that was her dinner. My mom had a coconut shrimp soup, and I had a veggie delight soup. But then the dessert, my sister, obviously, the cheesecake brulee. But my mom and I decided, hey, let's dip into, the things that we wouldn't have on an average day. So, I got the mango sticky rice, and she got Thai coconut pudding, and we shared it. The mango sticky rice was soaked in coconut, so there was coconut milk on the plate. It was very good. But then the Thai coconut pudding, I saw that, and it had pandan, and I recognized that as something that a YouTuber I watch has talked about. I can't remember if it was Janelle Eats or, dang it, I'm forgetting her name again. Lisa Nguyen. I don't know if I pronounced that right. It's spelled Nguyen. I can't pronounce it. I feel horrible if I pronounce that so terribly. But I can't remember which one it was that was having drinks and snacks with pandan in it. But that's how I knew about it, and I wanted to try pandan. So I was like, hey, nice. When I was describing how I was surprised at the texture, because I didn't expect it to be as chewy as it was, my mom was like, is it not supposed to be like that? And she got all freaked out, and I was like, no, I've never had it before. I just expected it to be different from how it was portrayed in videos and stuff. So she got all paranoid real quick. It was a whole thing. But I'm trying to find my Irish stories book so I can read more stuff and not just be awkwardly trying to talk about myself when I don't talk about myself much. Jeez, where is it? Oh, there's this one book I tried to read. I'm not gonna read it for you because I tried reading it and it was not as good as I expected. So honestly, my mom's about to barge into my room. over a movie night. Just wait for it. This is gonna... Okay, anyway. When she barges in, that'll be a fun moment. It's called Okay, Mr. Field by Catherine Killalea. I tried reading it. Oh my goodness. The basic premise is that this master pianist breaks his wrist in a train accident and then slowly loses his mind more and more by making impulsive decisions. And it just... I don't want to be mean to this author because I can tell the effort put into it. But it's just, in my opinion, not that good. It had good reviews, so it's dependent upon who reads it. But I didn't personally like the structural decisions or the dialogue choices at certain moments. So I didn't finish it because I wasn't able to. I was like, no. Sometimes I like to suffer for the bit, but this is not one of those times, you feel. So I just didn't. Oh my gosh. So I didn't tell Jinxie exactly, but they'll listen to this, so now they'll know, because this is sort of funny. The other night, I couldn't sleep. This was Thursday night. And lately I've been getting progressively less sleep, and they've been getting mad at me for not sleeping. So I couldn't sleep and I didn't want to sleep. So at some point I was just playing games on my phone, and then I compulsively wanted to get up and read, so I got up and read. But before that, I found my old poetry journal from 7th grade, and I read it, and then I wrote a poem at 1:33 in the morning. And it's so bad. Well, not bad, but I can't read it because it's might end up doxing myself by reading it. Because it's a review of my year, I guess. Or a review of the year since I've touched this notebook. But then I proceeded to stay up until 2:45 reading The Daughters of Moon. Well, The Daughters of the Moon by Lynn Ewing, or Ewing, I don't know. Which, it's been a pretty good book so far, if I do say so myself. Sorry, I'm pulling out the next book that I'm gonna read so I can be prepared for next week. Because next week... Let me check my calendar and make sure I'm not completely dumb. Next week does start February. Yes, it does, because Monday is January 31st. Anyway, so the next book I have pulled out already. We're prepared. And after February, this will probably take 4 weeks to read. It's roughly the same length. Is it? It's maybe... What the heck? 80, 73. I don't even know. I'm not putting the effort into math. Pages more. So maybe I'll extend the episode length by a little, so that it's not I have one of these at the end where it's just me awkward. But also I want it to be done by the end of February. Oh man, after that there's a sad book I have lined up. I don't want to read this again. Oh, I almost cried at that book. And then of course I have the selection for October set out on my shelf. I love ghost stories, depending on what kind of ghost story they are. It can't just be some puff piece about ghosts and friendship, really. It's gotta have a little bit of depth. Unless it's the webtoon comic Boo! It's Sex, I don't know if I'm allowed to say the sex word on here, but it's basically an sex class. Well, not class, but like sex education thing, where you learn about different aspects of safe sex and all that. So it was a good read. And my friend judged me. Like, why would you read it? And I was like, I figured the premise, but there was a pretty ghost lady, okay? She still wasn't on my side. Sorry, there's random fabric on my paper shelf. So, like, I just realized, imagine if this podcast gets, like, a fair amount of tread. I could sell merch. I could be one of those people. I limp-wristed when I said that. Man. Oh, I have so much random things in my room. My succulent is dying. Like, how am I managing to kill a succulent? Ah, that's so upsetting. Good thing I didn't name it. I'd be, like, emotionally attached. So, like, shoot, man. It's still upsetting that I'm managing to kill a succulent, but still. It could be worse for me. There's socks on the floor. Oh, I need to do laundry. I'll do that tomorrow. Anyway, my mom was, like, asking about a movie night. She was like, would you want to see the movie Matilda? We're doing a family movie night. We saw the musical last night. That's enough Matilda for a little bit. Like, I get the want for family bonding, but, like, you and Dad like horror movies and, like, more adult-tiered stuff, and I am a teenage child who just wants to watch cartoon movies. Like, well, I'll watch other movies, but, like, most of the time I watch miscellaneous, like, kids' cartoons. Like, there was this one I watched recently called Extinct. Oh, it was, like, a cute little film with, like, the plot twist. Ooh. I ain't spoiling that, but shit, man. Shoot, man. I didn't swear. You're hearing things. Oh my gosh. There was a snowstorm last night, and I don't talk about my parents much, but my mom hates driving in the snow. So, like, she got lost instantly, and then it was just such, like, a stressful car ride back. Because, like, she tried to pull over to set up directions for herself, but then 5 cars just stopped behind her, even though she had her hazards on. Which, like, and when we were getting back in the car, I didn't know how to turn the wipers off, so she yelled at me. It was a whole thing. Like, I'm sorry, ma'am. I've never like used the wiper function before in the car. I don't know how it works. That's not my fault. Like, geez, man. I have, like, such a slew of notebooks. I have, like, a random notebook where I put recipes from the internet that seem intriguing to me. I forget what I used this one for, actually. What did I use this for? I think this is my diet book. Yep. Or my wannabe diet book, because I don't use it, like, at all. I have this cute little cat notebook with Live, Laugh, Meow written on it, and, like, a bunch of little cat pictures that I haven't used yet. There's a notebook where I have some Morse code written in it. There's a notebook where I have, like, notes taken for Discord server creation. There's a notebook for this one story I'm trying to make. There's a creative writing notebook, my poetry notebook. Notebook where I put like various like random things about myself. A self-care like planner that my cousin got me. I think it's cousin for the status. I don't know. Families are weird, like fourth cousins and all that. I don't even know. I know she's my mom's cousin, so I think that makes her like my cousin. I don't know. Um, I have like a couple books. There's this one thing I found. It's called the Queer Bible. It's a series of essays. Oh, I can read one of the essays from it maybe, so that I can stop just talking about random things. Which essay should I read? Oh, I can read the RuPaul essay by Jack Guinness. If you don't know who RuPaul is, then like you're either violently hetero or deprived of queer culture. Let me get this straight. You publicly came out, did a ton of interviews, launched a queer website, and spent all your money commissioning pieces just so you could meet RuPaul? What kind of maniac, stalker, weirdo would do something like that? I replied to my boyfriend's wild accusation. We both knew without saying a word that I was exactly the type of maniac, stalker, weirdo that would do something like that. My life had been a never ending series of long cons, first as a lonely child and then as a painfully isolated teen. I retreated into a fantasy world. I imagined one day I'd have an impossibly glamorous life feeded as a male supermodel with a pile of celebrity-ish friends and in a fabulous wardrobe of designer clothes. I looked around my dreary life and pined for something more. My early life in South London in the 80s was impossibly beige. Perhaps a hangover from the hand-me-down 70s clothes and furniture that filled our flat. The food, our family Volvo, my pallid skin. I wanted hot pink, gold, and a tan. I'd caught a flash of something sparkly in the corner of my eye, and I have spent the rest of my life chasing it, while it remained frustratingly in my periphery, always out of reach. This is the chase for fame, the promise of escape, to make the fantasy real. And now I have questioned a rather fabulous life for myself, but something nags. There's a snag. A thread has caught and I'm unraveling. I need more. I need meaning. Inside of me, in the pit of my being, I am still that daydreaming little boy lost, and the more glamorous everything outside gets, the bigger, wider, and more painful the chasm between who I am and who I know I am and who everyone else thinks I am becomes. There's a breach at the core. That is the irony of glamour, of shimmer. It simply isn't real. But what was that spark that set me on this course? What shooting star caught me magpie-eyed and ruined my life? It was RuPaul, of course, covering a Kiki D song, of course. With Elton John, of course. Glamour offers a tempting and dangerous allure for many queer people. As we internalize society's disapproval of our identity, our sexuality, and gender expression, which is such a core, essential part of ourselves, we get caught up in a spiral of shame and a sense of worthlessness. Our parents and society often shame us, and then we continue to shame ourselves. My generation, in pre-social media times that then set off into the night, to clubs that we were too young to be in, sometimes in dangerous situations, so much of it fun but ultimately unsatisfying. Too many of us lose ourselves in the unholy trinity of sex, drugs, and alcohol addiction, codependency, and toxic relationships or patterns of behavior. Ironically, we lose ourselves in the very places where we're searching for meaning and identity. This emptiness springing from an impoverished sense of self-worth, a poison tree planted by a disapproving and oppressive culture, which we then ourselves feed and water through self-destructive thinking and behavior, leads us to seek our status-giving armor, designer clothes, glamorous friends, high-powered jobs, or perfect bodies. Through this mechanism, we tell ourselves and show others that we have worth. We are important. We are valid. We're shapeshifters, adapting to people, places, and things, changing ourselves to be liked or to stay physically safe. But this all comes at a price. That fixed inner sense of self can become stunted and undeveloped. When we feel worthless on the inside, no wonder we're drawn to external objects that give a sense of worth. Then we enter the gay community and find it inevitably infected with much of the toxicity of straight cis society, namely the two pillars of colonial patriarchy, money and power with racism and misogyny, which reveals itself as effeminacy shaming, as the methods of keeping those pillars in place. White gay men have a special responsibility to unpack and challenge these concepts. Our black, brown, trans, and lesbian family fought so hard for our rights, and in this ongoing and seemingly worsening climate of violence and oppression directed at trans people and the unchecked power of institutional racism and misogyny, we must now show up and fight on their behalf. Never before have there been more resources for white gay men and white people in general to educate ourselves about our privilege, our history as colonial oppressors that have created the systems that we benefit from, and face our whiteness in the politics. I was saying it right the first time. In the politics of race, which, as Rennie Edelage writes, operates on its inherent invisibility. Our challenge now as individuals and as a global queer community is to develop a strong and consistent identity imbued with a sense of self that is internally generated nor externally signaled. Through years of therapy, thank you to my therapist who have saved my life and given it meaning, I have further developed this inner, unchanging core self. I believe the power of community, of seeing ourselves mirrored in each other, feeling seen, connected, and loved, also develops this authentic self. Intersectionality, the interconnectedness of different marginalized social groups and our overlapping interests and rights, is the LGBTQ plus community's greatest strength. We are woven together not just through our oppression, but by the wonderful difference and uniqueness that make us targets of hatred in the first place. Through telling our stories and listening to the stories of others, we develop a healthy, boundary connectedness that reinforces us on a deeper level, moving us away from external status signifiers and identity masks, allowing us to move into maturity and wholeness. I spent years as a male model selling a certain type of performative masculinity. I was told by agents to butch it up, whatever that means. I policed my mannerisms, trying not to appear too feminine. I adopted what Matthew Todd refers to in his fantastic book of the same name as a straitjacket. I was performing oppressive drag, the opposite of everything real drag stands for. I wasn't challenging, exploring, or playing with gender. I was hiding behind its restrictive, socially acceptable forms. I was complicit in my own imprisonment, trapped in toxic masculinity. What a miserable existence. After coming out publicly, or rather breaking out, I felt able to be my true full self. I stopped internalizing a sense of shame that others were projecting onto me. I am trying to stop self-shaming. Our inheritance as queer people is not shame. It is hope and love. Having to question, explore, and claim your sexuality and gender, and often be oppressed for it, can create empathic, thoughtful, and inspiring human beings. We are descended from a long line of pioneers, our history stretching back through human civilization across endless cultures. We must walk tall in that legacy, showing that in spite of and because of our suffering, we are brave, awesome, and powerful individuals. We are a family. I was 12. The year was 1994. In a music video playing on a Saturday morning music television show, was it going live or CDUK? There she was, all 50 feet of her. Palpable sexual chemistry sparked between her and confirmed bachelor and suspected serial womanizer Elton John. She was probably his new girlfriend. That's how an unknown model had managed to snag such a great gig. She was so tall she had to be a supermodel because that's what tall people did for a living, unless they were employed as giants. Something deep down inside me knew she wasn't simply a woman. She was beyond the binary. She wasn't simply a man either. She was something more than the sum of her parts. A magical, forbidden, taboo creature sent to tempt, inspire, and drive us mad. Somehow, deep down, I knew Elton didn't really fancy women either, but together, as they dressed up as famous lovers from history, the illusion was irresistible. I suppose I knew there was something different about Elton John before I really understood understood what being gay meant. He was rebellious, boundary crossing, and didn't care what you thought of him. Before we know, we know. Gay people are drawn to each other before we understand our sexuality, as outsiders, as breakers of norms, as the rejected. We sense a shared secret revealing itself through pain or wild abandon. Clues, glances, and nods pull like magnets. The dejected John, desperate for his father's love, and James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain drew me in long before I read Giovanni's Room or discovered James's homosexuality. George Michael's rebellious anti-establishment streak, cheeky wink, and camper than camp videos lit a fire in me. A boy crying alone on a train in Bronski Beach, Small Town Boy climaxed into falsetto, bringing tears to my eyes without me knowing why. The lyrics called to me, a mother who doesn't understand, knowing you have to escape where you came from, desperately seeking love. And so RuPaul burst through my television in an off-the-shoulder Breton top, a 6.5-foot tall black siren in a ginormous blonde wig, calling me out for my miserable beige life and promising to take me away somewhere fabulous. Born RuPaul Andre Charles on 17 November 1960 in San Diego, RuPaul moved to Atlanta to study performing arts, then headed to NYC and became a celebrated fixture on the party scene, employed by nightlife legends like Suzanne Barsh. Female impersonation happened to be happy/gay accident. Performing in a gender F-word punk band. One night, Rue dragged up and the crowd went wild. RuPaul listened to the universe's stage direction and didn't look back. This is one of Rue's greatest lessons for us. We all have neat, fixed ideas about who we are and what we want to do in life. In the moments where I've relinquished control and expanded my narrow view of myself, I have found joy and success. Read the clues. Rue didn't necessarily grow up wanting to be a female impersonator, but when he smelled a hit, he seized the moment, making it his own. He became an international pop star with the single Supermodel, won a trailblazing MAC Cosmetics campaign, and as their spokesperson, raised funds for the MAC AIDS Fund. After a few years in the wilderness, though he never stopped gigging around the world, RuPaul returned with Drag Race, a simultaneous pastiche and celebration of reality TV shows such as Project Runway and America's Next Top Model. He returned to every network and eventually found a home on gay-centric cable channel Logo TV. Now the show calls the very mainstream VH1 home, with past seasons streaming on the international digital monster Netflix. Drag Race is a global phenomenon, spawning spin-offs, tours, live shows, and events, as well as international versions in the UK, Thailand, and Hong Kong. RuPaul on the global stage and ironically allowed him to appear as RuPaul out of drag for the first time, though still wearing some fabulous outfits. What a strange, wild journey. RuPaul took a risk and detoured into drag while remaining true to his punk values. He acts and hosts both in and out of drag, celebrated as the powerful human that he is. RuPaul sees his work as a challenge to identify stereotypes and to identity stereotypes and politics, telling Vogue, "We live in an egocentric world where identity is king, and we've elected the poster child for the ego in the USA. Drag is a perfect balance to that mentality. Ego is all about saying, I'm better than you are, and drag says you are not your clothes, you are not what it says you are on your birth certificate. You are a creation of your own imagination. I simply cannot overstate how much joy Drag Race brings to my life, and into the lives of millions of people around the world. I am never happier than when I'm watching Drag Race. Watching the show, I feel like I've come home. I'm with my chosen family. It creates a connectedness with the global queer community that hasn't existed before, set firmly in the mainstream. When I was a teenager, I had to desperately seek out any literature, films, or television shows that made me feel less alone. I could never have imagined that our community could come out of the shadows and not just be tolerated, but celebrated. It is legacy making, shaping our culture. Now, through the global popularity of Drag Race, RuPaul sets the agenda for his legion of fans, subverting the mainstream by inspiring a generation of queer and straight youth. Ru rightfully remains a poster child for misfits and Generation Queer. He is not here to make us feel safe. He wants to challenge and destroy, burn it all down and start again. His punk impulses are seemingly at odds with his mainstream success and engagement with consumerist culture. One in-joke of Drag Race is that Rue also seems to have a new product to peddle. The joke resonates because it is true. We are full of tensions and contradictions. Ultimately, Rue's work is about ripping off the illusions we cloak ourselves in, questioning our very identity. We're all born naked and the rest is drag. RuPaul's hosting style references the catchphrases and performances of iconic film stars and performers, from Joan Crawford to Liza to blaxploitation films. It was these references, some obvious, some frustratingly obscure, that inspired me to create the Queer Bible website in the first place. I wanted a place to go where I could immerse myself in the same cultural landmarks that RuPaul had been exposed to. The AIDS epidemic robbed us of an entire generation who would now be our elders, queer people who could educate us, show us the films, play us the music, and let us in on the jokes that make up queer culture. Drag Race is a gateway drug into queer culture. You want to know why reading is fundamental? Watch Paris is Burning. Who wants 51% of this company? Watch Faye Dunaway as Joan Crawford in Mommy Dearest. My girls are Maggie Smiths in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, and Rue's catchphrases themselves have entered the popular lexicon. As depicted in the iconic film about the New York drag ball scene, Paris is Burning, we need drag mothers to initiate us into our mysterious, wonderful, and subversive birthright. Now everyone has access to a drag mother. In turn, RuPaul inspired me to create the Queer Bible, to create something beyond myself, something real, a platform for others to tell their stories in their own voices, a space and community for the next generation who can joyously celebrate our culture and educate us about evolving concepts of gender and politics. By looking back, we are empowered to look forward. As a child, the shallow and bombastic caught my eye. Now I'm reaching towards something deep and solid. Rue has claimed, passing through the glamour and lure of New York nightlife and Hollywood, a meaningful path. Now RuPaul inspires a generation to seek out those fierce humans who bravely stumped before us and celebrate who they are. I think back to that little boy watching RuPaul on television. Rue appeared as a fairy godmother, traveling by my side. I think of all the confusion, bullying, and suffering that was to come for me. So many times I wanted to give up, but I'm so glad I carried on. On the other side of that pain was a beautiful life. Little Jack would accept himself, repair relationships with his biological family, and would find an additional chosen family in the queer community. He would eventually be happy, be proud, and love who he is. I thank RuPaul for showing me that that is possible. As Ru says, if you can't love yourself, how in the heck are you gonna love somebody else? Can I get an amen? I would read the about the author thing, but I'm already over time and I said I was gonna cut this short. I have a knack for being I'm gonna cut this short and then proceeding for the normal time somehow. That's like a skill or something. Give me a trophy for that, somebody. I demand it. I'm just kidding. But whoa. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I really hope there's no audio skipping. Oh my god. If there is, then I'll probably have to find a new recording site so that I can have the MP3 files. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. I'm not saying what I said in episode 3. I can't say see ya. Why do people say see ya on podcasts? You don't even see people if you're a YouTuber. Wait. Now I'm confused by outro terms. Thank you for listening. I'll vibe with you next time. Bye-bye.